Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I want to share a 6x6 paper pad tutorial. I will be making 54 cards from one paper pad that has 24 sheets of paper and talking a little bit about my process. I'm going to be using my one sheet wonders, but also introducing a brand new one. So you may have seen some of these designs before, and I understand that one sheet wonders is not everyone's preferred way of tackling a paper pad, and some people don't even feel the need to use up a whole paper pad. But I just kind of wanted to show a simple way that I would approach a paper pad if I really wanted to use the whole thing up and do that in a relatively quick way. 24 sheets of double-sided paper. This is a Michael's Recollections paper pad, and I did buy the die cuts that go with it. Particularly, I liked this paper pad and die cut set because when I was looking at the back of the die cut set, I noticed that a lot of the sentiments actually worked really well for cards, and often they tend to be a little bit more scrapbooking focused. So when I saw they worked well for cards, I thought it would be a nice way to show you how you can make a lot of cards relatively cheaply or with minimal supplies if that's what you're interested in, because so many of the die cuts directly went with it. I bought one pack of the die cuts, but I think considering how many cards I made, 2 sets of die cuts would be more appropriate. With my one sheet wonders, generally when you take one sheet of 6x6 paper, you get 2 cards. So if you were going to use my one sheet wonders, generally you could assume that you would be, if there were like 24 pieces of paper, you would get 48 cards. If there were 36 sheets of paper, then you would get 72 cards. So you can kind of double it. And that will give you an idea of how many die cut pieces you would want as well. So if you look at the die cut pack and it says, okay, there's 20 pieces, you might go, okay, well, I know I'm going to need 2 packs. In this instance, I do think with the 24 sheets and the amount of die cuts that were there, 2 packs, I would have easily been able to create cards without adding anything extra. Because I only have 1 pack, I will be adding some extra things. But again, this is just kind of an example because I think that there's this sort of myth that you need a lot of things to create cute cards. And I don't think that's true. I think that you can create much more complicated cards. You can do really cool, pretty techniques, but that doesn't necessarily make the card that much more special to someone automatically. A lot of it is that thought behind the card. So today I will be introducing a new 6x6 one sheet wonder. It'll be the one sheet wonder sketch or template number 20. You can go over to my blog and you will be able to download a PDF that shows you how to cut the 6x6 paper and then the suggested sketch, like how I would assemble those pieces. And now this will be the 20th one for 6x6 paper onto an A2 size card. If that's not your jam, I do have slimline templates. I have starting my 5x7 templates. I have some, basically just other ideas. And there are some general sketches that aren't necessarily one sheet wonders, so hopefully there's something that appeals to you. And of course, you could pick completely different one sheet wonders than I did to use up your paper pad. Most of them will work well, especially with double-sided papers. Now, in addition to being able to get the one sheet wonders individually, I also made what is the word for it? A document where I put them all together. And so you can, I put all the sketches together. So you can download one PDF that has the first 20 sketches on it, and you could print those out separately. The reason that I like to do that is, as you can see in the corner here on screen, I have a laminated copy of sketch number 20. And that way, once I have cut all of my pattern paper pieces, I can put them in a bag and then I can put the sketch with them. And then I can work on cutting out the cardstock pieces, and I have it all grouped together so nothing's going to get lost, but I don't have to assemble them all because I am this paper pad had 24 sheets and there are 4 of each sheet. So because there's 4 of each sheet, I picked 4 sketches. And then I cut 1 of each design with each one sheet wonder. So like sketch number 20, for instance, every single one of the unique designs in the paper pad has 1 set of cards cut to sketch 20. And then another one to sketch 7, to sketch 9, to sketch 11, because those are the ones I chose. All this will also be in my blog post so that you can kind of, if you're having a hard time parsing all the information I'm throwing at you, the blog post should give you a lot more detail. So basically, I was able to assemble a whole bunch at one time because I can take this printed sketch and I can place it inside of the bag with all the pieces. I also didn't worry too much about like mixing up the different papers. So maybe these yellow stripes are not the back of, or these are the yellow, solid yellows aren't the back of the rainbow stripe. It was kind of hard once you'd gotten so many was cut to keep track of all that. So I didn't worry too much about it. And I figured if you were doing something similar with mass production, you'd probably be in the same boat. Now, you can decide that you want, so like this particular paper that I'm working on right now, it has snow cones on it. I cut the strips of the snow cones and the square, but I could use the back instead of using the snow cone. I could use whatever's on the back of the snow cone. Maybe it's a solid or a different pattern, but I liked it. I think it worked well with the blue mat that I chose. So I did all snow cones, but then I mixed it up. Instead of putting the snow cone square with the snow cone strips, I mixed it with a rainbow design. And that's the nice thing about kind of doing this sort of mass production style is you can mix up your patterns. You certainly don't have to. And what's great about double-sided paper is that both sides usually coordinate. Occasionally you will find that the way the one sheet wonder calls for you to cut the paper, if there's a strong sense of direction, like if there's writing across your pattern paper, you might find that it doesn't work for you to mix up the pieces. You might have to be a bit more careful, for instance. But this pattern paper worked really well. Like the rainbows, they do have a direction, but I was able to kind of carefully work around that. And whenever it mattered, like if the rainbows were all of a sudden supposed to, like they were on their side. Now, sketch 20. Sorry, I'm going to be a little all over the place because the nature of these videos is me just talking about my process. It's not me describing every little thing that I'm doing on camera, because I think once you see the blog post and if you go and download these PDFs, you'll know what to do, and you don't need me to explain to you what I'm cutting and gluing throughout each process, because all those measurements are over on the blog. So anyway, sketch 20. Or one sheet wonder number 20, that works for basically any direction because of the way it's cut. So you just need to make sure that as you cut it, your top and bottom are correct, but then it will, you don't need to turn any pieces on their side, for instance. However, here, when the one I'm working on next is sketch 9, the directionality will matter. So here, as I turn some of these rainbows on their side, all of a sudden they're going to be wrong, but the back is solid pink. So it won't matter. I'll just use the solid pink on those. That's why I'm a big fan of double-sided paper. Sketch number 20 also gets you 3 cards. Often my one sheet wonders will make 2 cards with one sheet of 6x6 paper, but the way that sketch 20, the idea worked out, it got 3 cards. And so I'm actually sometimes not a fan of how many cards I'm getting out of a single sheet of 6x6 paper if my goal is to use up paper or use up a paper pad, because I'm making that many more cards, so I need that much more time and that much more decoration, etc., etc. So if you like to make a lot of cards with a limited amount of supplies, some of my sketches do make extra, and you can look at those, but standard is 2. I choose 8.5 by 11. Sorry. I don't think I explained what a one sheet wonder is. So I think a lot of people are already familiar. If you're a fan of my channel, if you've watched some other videos, you're probably very familiar. But a one sheet wonder is when you use up the whole sheet of paper to make cards or possibly a scrapbook page, and you don't leave any scraps. So the wonder is that, there's no scraps, because a lot of times I find a lot of crafters struggle with having pattern paper scraps. And so I wanted to start sharing how you could not have those scraps, because I didn't want them in my craft room, and I figured some other people would be the same way. Another reason that I started creating one sheet wonders is because I like having simple ideas to use with colored images. Today I'm focusing on using die cuts, but a lot of my one sheet wonders, you'll see I pair them with colored images. Things that I stamp down and I color with my Copics, because that's actually one of my favorite parts of crafting, is the stamping and coloring. However, once you've stamped and colored an image, you want to complete a card with it. And I don't like as much doing like fancy techniques to the background and making these beautiful backgrounds that some people do. That's not the part of the process I enjoy as much. I like pattern paper. And so I wanted to kind of combine my two personal loves in terms of crafting. So this particular pattern or die cut set did include a lot of sentiments specifically that worked well for cards, and that is why I picked it. And after I have started assembling the different cards, because as you've seen and I've talked about a little bit, is that I cut all of the pattern paper to the specified size. Then I cut all of the cardstock to the specified size. And something that's important to note is you will have no pattern paper scraps at the end of this, but you will have cardstock scraps. I personally am much more okay with cardstock scraps because I know different ways to use them more easily. For instance, the next time I make a one sheet wonder, I'll start with my scraps. So I might need just a little border piece. And I'm much more likely to use the same solid and get that able to, mix that more easily than trying to match pattern paper from one collection to another. Also, I will take cardstock scraps and I will glue them together to create my own foam tape. So it's actually not foam, it's cardstock, but 2 layers of thick cardstock can work to bump up your card. And that's what I'm doing with a lot of these die cuts. So you'll see that I'm gluing random stacks of colored paper behind them. That's what it is. I take 2 layers of my really thick cardstock. This is all my cardstock is Recollections 110-pound colored cardstock. And then my card bases are Accent Opaque 120-pound, but Michaels sells the 110-pound white cardstock that also works pretty well. So, like I said, I have many purposes for extra cardstock, and I find it easier to use than pattern paper. I also will die cut words out of it. That's another really common thing I do because I like large sentiments on some of my cards, and so you'll see that in other one sheet wonders. Once I have cut out all those pattern paper pieces according to the measurements, I'll cut out my cardstock according to the measurements as well. And to emphasize, if it's not clear already, when you go to my site and you download one sheet wonder number whatever, 11, for instance, it tells you how to cut the 6x6 paper, and it also tells you what size mat you will need if you want to mat those pieces of pattern paper. My style is to generally mat them. I used to use a lot of 6x6 paper without mats, and I think it can look great, but I've just kind of gotten used to it lately. It works better for this no scrap concept to me because it gives the pieces a little bit more of a substantial look and allows them to take up more presence on the paper. But, it certainly is a bit more of an expense than, say, if you were to not mat any of it, you would need a lot less cardstock. but that's up to your discretion. Here, I'm kind of showing you my process of what I would do with cardstock scraps. So when I cut out all of my mats for sketch number 7, I was left with a lot of these small strips that weren't appropriate for mats, like they weren't the right size for any of the mats that I needed. And I thought, instead of holding on to these somewhere in a drawer, what I'm going to do is immediately I'm going to tape the strips together so they're 2 layers thick, and then use that to bump up some of my die cut elements so that as I go through this process, there are less scraps left. And here I had like an odd number of them for whatever reason, so I cut it in half, or actually tore it in half. And then I can take all of these little doubled up strips now and put them in a little box so that I have a stack of my fake foam tape ready to go. Basically, I'm just saying dimensionals, because it's nothing to do with foam and it's not tape either. I need to add glue to all of this. As I do my mass assembly, you'll notice that I am using a Scotch Atg. If there's going to be a lot of repeated information in any of these tutorials, because I never know who's new to the channel and who is a longtime viewer. So I just try to share as much information, tips and tricks, etc. as possible. I like to use my Scotch Atg because I find that it is the fastest and cheapest adhesive for if you like to make a lot of cards like I do. If you like to use a lot of pattern paper, if you need to glue a lot of layers together, it holds pretty well. I don't really have issues with anything falling off later. And if you buy the refills in bulk, it's pretty economical. However, I understand that it's not for everyone. Some people have a lot of trouble with it. They have some trouble with the glue catching, like, you're trying to pull it along as a tape runner and the tape is not sticking to your paper. I will say I still have trouble with it from time to time. It's not 100% perfect. Sometimes I'm trying to glide it along and the tape doesn't come out. But I do have a video that I will link where I share some tips and tricks with that. Basically, my biggest thing is if I'm gliding it along and nothing's coming out, it's sometimes because I'm going too fast. And so I haven't really given the adhesive a chance to sort of stick at the top or, at the beginning of my pull. So if you find that, slow down a little bit, that might help. Or check out the tips and tricks video if you have some other things. Like if you have trouble loading, I describe how to load the Atg Gun. The other adhesive that I have used in this video and will continue to use is the Barely Art glue. I liked having a liquid glue on hand for smaller spaces. I don't like gluing really big layers with it. Personally, I find that to be more time consuming, more messy. But for gluing on little things like the die cut, I really do like the Barely Art glue. Particularly, I like that you can get the fine tip bottle, but then once you've used it up, you can buy a large refill. And a lot of other quality glues that I've seen in the craft industry do not have refills. You have to kind of basically purchase a whole new plastic bottle every time. And when there's only a couple ounces of glue each time, that can really add up. So having a larger refill is more economical and a little bit more environmentally friendly. Here, I am putting a little bit of that extra cardstock behind some of my elements, like foam tape, using it in place of foam tape. But specifically, in this instance, part of my strip is going to be laying flat on the card base, and part of it is going to be overlapping this long rectangle to the left. And that would be a little bit bumpy if I were to put one solid piece of adhesive across it, because part of it would sort of bump up onto that rectangle. So to prevent that, I'm taking that extra bit of cardstock and I'm putting it behind where it touches the card base. But then where it touches the rectangle, there's no cardstock behind it so that it smooths it out. This is something that I've seen many crafters do. I think that I originally saw Christy Marcotte do this, and I think it's an excellent idea. I know a lot of people who watch my channel, watch her channel, But if you haven't, I will leave you a link, because if you like working with pattern paper, she does a lot of excellent videos with pattern paper as well. Each time after I assemble a bunch of the One Sheet Wonder design, so after I assemble a bunch of the cards, I then try to embellish a bunch at one time as well. I find that to be faster, but I find you can get a little bit of burnout if you're doing too much assembly or too much embellishment at one time. Like, I kind of like to switch up what I'm doing in the craft room. If I'm been coloring a lot, sometimes it's nice to take a break and just do some like pattern paper assembly, something that's a little bit less concentrated or a little bit less detailed, or vice versa. If I've just been kind of gluing paper together time and time, like, because I'm making 54 cards here, right? So in each chunk, I'm making 12 of each card. So once you've been sitting there with that Atg gun just swiping and sticking and swiping and sticking, like, you get kind of bored and you wish you were doing something maybe a little bit more creative and there was a little bit more thinking going on. And so maybe I would then take a break to color an image if I was going to use colored images, for instance. Or in this case, I take that break to kind of just make a creative decision about what embellishments I'd like to use. The other thing that I want to share about this particular paper pad is at the top where they put the hole so that they can hold it onto the displays at Michael's. There's still pattern paper there. So there's this like thin, I want to say like 1/2 inch strip of pattern paper with a hole at the top of every 6x6 piece. So what you're like, if you cut off that strip, and it's actually perforated, so if you were to, bend that strip off, you'd be left with this 1/2 inch by 6 inch strip with a hole in the center. And you still have your full 6x6 piece of paper. I have seen some in the past. I don't remember who it was, but I've seen some where the hole interferes with the pattern paper and like you don't have a full 6x6 piece. I really don't like that. But you do. In this instance, you have a full sheet of 6x6 paper and that leftover strip. So I've shown it on camera, but I want to make sure that I explicitly tell you in case you missed it. I took that 6 inch by 1/2 inch piece with the circle in the center and I cut it in half across the circle. Then that little half circle end that's left now, I cut a little banner into it, and you'll see at some point that I think you can actually see them off to the side, very much in the bottom right hand corner there. I have these little strips of pattern paper that have little banner ends in them. And basically what I mean by that is like there's a little triangle cut into them. So I have all of those and they're going to go on the inside of my cards. So each piece of pattern paper created 2 approximately 3 inch by 1/2 inch banners. I could try to think about how to incorporate them onto the front of the card, but I wanted to keep it simple. That was my goal here. So with that in mind, I'm just going to add those to the inside, usually in like the bottom left-hand corner of the card. I personally like that it adds a bit of a finishing touch to the inside. You can see that it takes a lot of time to do this much cutting. And I realize that it's certainly not for everyone. Like there are people who want to have a finished product and not take days and days, but you're going to have a lot more cards. And again, I know not everyone is looking to have a lot of cards. Like some people are content to make 1 card a week because that's all they ever need to send. But as some of you may know, I like to donate my cards. So I like to make a bunch of them. And often I will make them more unique. You can see a lot of cards on my channel have more detail. These are some more of my simpler cards. But if you really just have fun making cards, like if you really enjoy the process, donating your cards can be great. And there's a link in the video description where I share some resources about donating your cards. Specifically, I share places where you can donate them, like places to send your completed cards. And I share jokes that you can put inside the cards, because a lot of times the organizations will ask you to include a message inside of your cards. And some of these organizations serve kids, some serve seniors, some serve veterans or active duty service members. And my jokes are probably most oriented towards kids, but I know a lot of people of all ages enjoy a good corny joke now and again. And so you can use those and you can print them off and put them inside of your cards, and then add a little personal message to go with it, sign your name, etc., depending on what the criteria of the organization is. I am not affiliated with any of these organizations. I don't speak for any of them. I just share links, and I always ask you to go check and see what their personal recommendations and requirements are. This is sketch number 11. What is unique about sketch number 11 is behind it, it looks like there's this long strip of paper that's 4 inches wide, but in fact, it's actually 2 little pieces of pattern paper that I kind of separate to create the look of one long strip. And that's what I'm doing here. These are little 1.5 inch squares, and I am gluing them onto this scrap of paper that is going to make it look like a longer strip behind it. But because the middle essentially is going to be tucked under, it's okay that there's no border on the middle. It's okay that sometimes my pieces of paper are even overlapping. And if you find what I'm doing here, trying to figure out the math of it, to be complicated, which I can totally get because there's a lot of cutting and math and measuring, etc., in this process. Well, hopefully there's not much math left for you guys, because I do tell you all the measurements, but my point is I can understand if you would want to approach it differently. You can take a mat that's 1/4 inch bigger, and that's what it says on the sketch how to do it. But in this case, I was trying to save paper, and because I had some pieces of cardstock that were about the right size, as long as I left one of the ends such that it didn't have a border on it but was tucked under, I could basically save some cardstock and use some scraps. So I'm sorry if that's a little bit confusing to anyone, but in my sketch, I try to show you the least complicated way to do it, figuring those of you that are interested will adapt and make your scraps work as best you can. And those of you who like to just keep it simple will do that. And either way is fine. I definitely started to run a little bit low on sentiments that I thought would work well or feel complete on a card. Because there were some die cuts that when it says, there's 36 die cuts or whatever in this particular set. Some of them weren't great for my purposes, such as there's one that says something to the effect of feeling better. Most of the organizations that I donate to ask for you not to send anything, because some of the organizations serve people who are ill or are suffering from a chronic illness. And therefore, something like feel better isn't particularly relevant. And also, the point of the cards is to sort of just be upbeat and, if anything, sort of just provide a bright spot that has nothing to do with their illness. And therefore, a feel better card is not something that I personally need. I also don't need a lot of birthday cards or thank you cards, because a lot of the organizations do prefer more general everyday type sentiments. I did make some birthday and some thank yous because I will use them personally, and there are some organizations that I know of that do find those helpful. But they're definitely, I know some people who make cards, they make mostly birthday cards. I actually am kind of the opposite. And so therefore, some sentiments might work great for you in there, but maybe not for my purposes specifically. Here's where I show what I'm doing with those ends. As I mentioned, you get these strips at the top. This was recorded a long time ago, a couple of weeks, maybe months ago at this point. The voiceovers are time consuming, and I don't always have the energy to talk this long. I to be honest with you, my throat's beginning to hurt here because it's been about 30 minutes. But I did want to make sure that I talked about it. And here I showed it. I showed you how I cut those strips because they were perforated. They had those little fuzzies at the end from when something, like they have those perforations. And I cut those off just so it was a little bit more of a clean look. And then I cut the little triangle into each of those half circles. And here I can put one little strip on the inside of each of my cards. Some of my cards were horizontal, but very few. They were mostly vertical. And that was because that's how the sketches were. But some sketches that are vertical do work horizontal, particularly sketch number that I use today, sketch number 9 and 20 can really kind of be flipped either way, depending on what you personally like. I think actually really all of them. I think 11 works fine. It's personal preference. Anyway, most of my cards are the sort of vertical portrait style. I ran out of die cuts, which is what my babbling about was earlier. I would recommend, if you were to purchase this collection, if it's still available at Michael's, if you don't want to add some additional elements, get 2 packs of die cuts, and always consider how many cards you might be getting. Like if you're going to use a whole pattern paper pack, if you use the sketches or something similar, you might get about 2 cards for each 1 sheet of pattern paper. And therefore, when you're buying your die cuts, kind of think, am I going to have enough die cuts that I can make 2 cards for each piece of pattern paper? I hope that makes sense. But you probably have stamps and stuff to use at home, or you have other old die cuts from that you can make work. In this instance, here are some images that I colored that I did not have a explicit purpose for. Like I just colored them because I wanted to color. I find coloring relaxing, but I didn't have a card in mind. And so I keep all of those colored images in little bags at a collection, in a drawer in my room. And so therefore I had them on hand. And I'm not going to be sharing how I do Copic colored any of these. But if you do like Copic coloring, or you want to see some more about Copic coloring, I do often talk about it on my channel in my typical one sheet wonder tutorials, and I have some videos on my Instagram. If you're not following me on Instagram, I'd love to have you over there too. I share things that I don't share on YouTube on Instagram. So if you want to see more content, follow that link. Here are the sketches printed and laminated, and they'll be in a separate PDF. There is no pattern paper left, but here are a few of the die cuts I had left because they didn't work well for me, and I'm going to be okay to just sort of pass those on in some capacity. This is the end of the video. I have made 54 cards. I'm going to quickly put them all out on the screen, so you can kind of just get an idea of what it looks like very quickly. However, there's also a blog post where you'll be able to see a picture of every card, and you'll get the details and the links and all the resources that I've discussed throughout the video. And thank you so much for spending this large amount of time with me. I hope that you found something about this interesting, inspiring, helpful, etc. I am going to leave you, as I mentioned, all the links, including some of the products in the video description below, and to my other social media channels. And then there'll be some videos here at the end if you want to check out some other tutorials. I would really love it if you give this video a thumbs up, and if you subscribe to my channel because you want to see some more about using pattern paper. Have an awesome, awesome day. Bye.